So, in order to understand the language of behaviour, it's helpful to remind ourselves of what happens in our brains when we're feeling stressed, upset, overly emotional. Some neurologists have suggested that the idea of the upstairs downstairs brain, as this slide shows, is actually quite simplistic. But I really like the imagery of this upstairs downstairs brain by Daniel Siegel. So just to recap, what's going on in our brains during stress or change or transitions or conflict situations? Usually, when we're calm, information comes into a part of our brain called the thalamus. That acts like an air traffic controller, and it decides where to send the information. It sends the information usually to the thinking part of the brain that thinks about it. That's the cerebrum, the large part of the brain that's divided into the left and right hemispheres. And then the information gets passed on and translated into actions and emotions. This is when the upstairs brain is in control. We can think before we act. We're able to make decisions. We can have empathy. And at this point, we are in control. However, when we're feeling very stressed or upset about something, it happens slightly differently in our brains. And what happens? The information comes as usual to the thalamus. And instead of sending it to the thinking part of our brain, it bypasses that part of the brain and sends the information straight to the amygdala. Basically, it says, we're in danger here, or we haven't got time to think about this. We need to act. We need to act now. So the information goes straight to the amygdala, bypasses the thinking part of the brain. And Dan Goleman calls this the amygdala hijacking. And this is when the downstairs brain, as Siegel calls it, is now in control. We act before we think. We're in that freeze, fight or flight mode that you may have come across. We have overpowering emotions and increased hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. So when we have an argument and we say something that perhaps we shouldn't say, we might say, I'm really sorry, I just wasn't thinking. Actually, you weren't. It's impossible to think when you're in this high emotional state. Now, everyone's brains react in this way. And as adults, we've had lots of opportunities to learn strategies for how to respond. And we become quite practiced at getting ourselves out of freeze, fight or flight, sometimes before we're in too much trouble. But most young children haven't learned how to deal with these feelings yet. So young children can be emotionally dysregulated, perhaps a little more than others. And any children who are emotionally immature, or children who've experienced adverse childhood experiences, or children who are neurodiverse, so children, for example, who may have autism, ADHD, dyspraxia or dyslexia, they will also appear more dysregulated than others at times. So we need to recognise that this is a very natural response, and this happens, quite often. But what we can do about it is use calming techniques with our children before we try to resolve any issues.